What kind of man finds a child on the edge of death? And why does he choose to save her when he could barely save himself? That question haunted Cole Harrington long before he even realized it existed. Buried somewhere beneath the frozen layers of his own past, on that night, the kind of Montana winter night when even the stars seemed to hold their breath. Cole wasn't looking for redemption. He was just trying to survive the cold, the silence, and the memories that had been clawing at him for years. But fate, cruel and merciful in equal measure, had a way of dragging him back into the light, whether he wanted it or not. The storm had already swallowed most of the valley by the time Cole rode out to check the trapline. Snow lashed against his coat in sharp, wind-driven sheets, wrapping the entire landscape in a pale, merciless blur. His horse, Ember, snorted against the cold, stepping carefully through the deepening drifts. Cole kept his head down, jaw tight, breath steaming through the wool scarf wrapped around his face. It was the kind of storm that didn't just chill bone. No, it pressed into the mind, stirring memories that should have stayed quiet. Memories of another winter night 2 years prior, when the doctor shook his head and Cole's world cracked in half. He wasn't expecting anything but the usual. Half-frozen traps, maybe a coyote or two if he was lucky. But the world has a way of shifting in a single heartbeat. His horse halted abruptly, ears flicking. Cole looked up, confused at first, then narrowed his eyes at a shape near the bend of the creek. Something small, something out of place. Ember took a hesitant step closer, and that was when Cole heard it. A sound so faint he almost mistook it for the wind. A weak, brittle whimper. His breath caught. That sound didn't belong out here. Cole swung off his horse and trudged through the deep snow toward the shape. It was a basket. An ordinary woven basket, half buried beneath a thin crust of ice. The closer he got, the more he felt his heart thud against his ribs. He knelt, brushed the snow away, and froze. Inside was an infant, a girl. Tiny, motionless except for the shallow flutter of her breath. Frost clung to her eyelashes. Her lips were turning blue. Her blanket, thin, soaked, useless in this weather, was stiff with ice. For a moment, everything else disappeared. The snow, the cold, the storm, even the sound of his own breathing. The memory of his lost son slammed into him so hard he had to close his eyes. That helpless weight in his arms, that tiny hand that never gripped back. That silence, that impossible choking silence. No, Cole whispered, voice breaking through the wind. Not again, not her. It wasn't a promise to the baby. It was a promise to himself, to the man he had once been, or perhaps to the man he had failed to be. Without hesitation, he stripped off his gloves and slipped his bare hands beneath the infant. Wincing at how cold she was, colder than anything living should ever be. He held her against his chest, trying to warm her with the heat of his body. She didn't cry. She didn't move. Only that faint, fragile breath told him she was still here. "Come on, sweetheart," he murmured. "Stay with me." He wrapped her inside his coat, secured her close to his heart, and climbed back onto Ember. The wind cut at his face, but he kicked the horse forward, knowing they had miles to cross before reaching the cabin. Every minute was a battle. Fighting the storm, fighting fear, fighting the ghosts that whispered he would lose her just like he had lost his family. The cabin lights finally appeared through the storm's white curtain, flickering weakly through the windows. Cole burst through the door, heat rushing around him as he stumbled toward the fireplace. He dropped to his knees, unbuttoned his coat, and gently pulled the baby out, laying her near the rising fire. She remained frighteningly still. Cole grabbed blankets, warmed water, and the jar of goat's milk he kept from habit more than need. Hands trembling, he worked quickly. warming her fingers, rubbing her tiny feet, coaxing her jaw open to accept the milk. For a long time, nothing happened. Then suddenly, her chest shuddered, and a thin cry broke the silence. Cole exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. It was the smallest cry he'd ever heard, weak and strained, but it was life. Real, fighting life. "That's it," he whispered, leaning close. "Don't give up." He held her all night, rocking her, warming her, murmuring words he didn't know were still inside him. As the storm howled outside, Cole felt something shift in him. A warmth, a heaviness, a responsibility. He didn't know who she was or why she had been left to die, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was his to protect. By dawn, when the storm finally eased, the nameless baby slept against his chest, breathing stronger. Cole looked at her face, still fever-flushed, still delicate, and felt something stir where grief had once hollowed him out. "Grace," he whispered. "Your name is Grace." Outside, the world was white, silent, and endless. Inside the cabin, a man who thought he had nothing left found the faint ember of purpose burning again. By the time Cole Harrington rode into Willow Creek, the storm had passed. But the cold hadn't loosened its grip on the land. Snow still clung to the rooftops like white armor, and the main street lay hushed beneath a brittle morning frost. Cole held Grace close beneath his coat, keeping her tiny body pressed against his chest as Ember's hooves clopped steadily along the icy road. He had barely slept, barely eaten, and barely breathed, except to make sure she still did. The town looked almost unchanged from the last time he had come through, same wooden storefronts, same saloon lanterns swinging in the wind. But everything felt different. He wasn't just a solitary rancher anymore. He was a man walking into town with a life depending on him. It didn't take long for people to notice. A few townsfolk turned, eyes narrowing, whispers starting like small fires in the cold air. A man like Cole rarely came off his land unless he needed supplies or something had gone wrong. So when he arrived with a bundle clutched tightly to his chest, wrapped in his coat, even the laziest gossip found immediate purpose. "Is that a baby? Lord above, whose is it? Where'd he get that child?" Cole ignored them as best he could. He guided Ember toward the boarding house, the only place he knew in Willow Creek where kindness wasn't rationed like winter wheat. The porch steps creaked under his boots as he climbed them, knocking once, twice, before the door swung open. Rachel Whitmore stood there, apron dusted with flour, dark hair tied back, eyes widening the instant she saw the bundle in his arms. "Cole?" she breathed. "What happened? God, is that—" "I need your help," he said, voice raw. "Please." That was all it took. Rachel stepped aside and ushered him in, shutting the door behind him to block out the cold and, just as importantly, the curious eyes gathering outside. Inside, warmth wrapped around them, wood smoke, baking bread, familiar comfort that almost made Cole's knees weaken. He unwrapped Grace just enough for Rachel to see her small face. Rachel pressed a hand to her mouth in shock, then knelt beside Cole as he laid the baby on a quilt by the fire. "She's burning up," Rachel said, touching Grace's forehead. "How long has she been like this?" "Since last night," Cole answered. "Found her by the creek. Basket was half frozen. She ain't cried but once." Rachel's eyes softened with compassion and horror all at once. "You did right bringing her here. Let me get cloths. Sheriff Dalton needs to know too." Cole tensed at that, but Rachel caught it. "He won't judge you," she added firmly. "Not Frank." She wasn't wrong. Sheriff Frank Dalton arrived minutes later, tall and sturdy, the kind of man who could settle a saloon fight with one look. But when he saw Grace, his expression changed from authority to concern. "Good Lord," Frank murmured. "Someone left her out there on purpose?" "Looks that way," Cole said. Frank studied Cole's exhausted face, You did a brave thing riding through that storm. Many wouldn't. Cole didn't answer. He didn't feel brave. He just felt terrified of failing her. Rachel moved around the room with practiced calm. Cooling cloths, warm broth for Cole, a small spoon of milk for Grace. Frank stepped outside briefly, trying to keep the gathering crowd back. But judgment spread faster than truth ever could. Through the window, Cole saw people gesturing, some shaking heads, some casting looks that cut deeper than any knife. He find her or take her? A man alone can't raise a child. Where's her mother? Something's off about this. Cole tried to block it out. He focused on Grace, on her small breaths and the slight twitch of her fingers. But judgment had a way of seeping through walls. The door opened again, and this time Rachel's face tightened with dread before the man even spoke. Warren Caldwell, dressed in his polished coat, hat angled just so. The town councilman carried himself with the confidence of a man used to being obeyed. His eyes landed on the baby, and something cold flickered there. Not concern, but calculation. So the rumors are true, Warren said. You brought a child into town. Cole felt his jaw clench. Warren, not now. On the contrary. Warren replied smoothly, stepping closer. Now is exactly the time. That baby needs proper care, proper surroundings, not a lonely shack in the woods. Rachel stepped between them. Cole's taken better care of her in one night than anyone else did before she was abandoned. Maybe, Warren said, or maybe he's hiding something. Frank stepped forward, jaw tightening. Enough. You don't get to accuse a man without a single piece of proof. Warren lifted his hands innocently. I'm only thinking of the child, and of the town's reputation. People talk. They wonder why a reclusive widower suddenly appears with an infant he claims to have found in the snow. Cole stood. I have nothing to hide. Warren looked him over like a man inspecting damaged goods. Perhaps not. But until we know the truth, that baby should be placed somewhere stable, with someone respectable. Rachel's voice turned sharp. You mean someone you approve of, when it comes to the welfare of a child? Warren said, adjusting his gloves. Approval matters. The room fell silent except for the crackling fire. Frank spoke first. There's no proof Cole did anything wrong. And until we learn more, Grace stays with him and under Rachel's supervision if needed. Grace? Warren repeated with a sneer. He named her already? Cole didn't flinch. She needed a name. She needs a home. Warren countered. Not a broken man grieving ghosts. That line cut deep, deeper than Warren knew. But Rachel stepped forward before Cole could. You're out of line. For now, Warren said coolly. I'll leave this to the sheriff. But mark my words, this matter isn't finished. When the door finally shut behind him, the room fell into a heavy quiet. Rachel exhaled slowly, then turned back to Grace, gently wiping her forehead. Frank shook his head. Ignore him, Cole. Caldwell likes power more than he likes people. Cole nodded but didn't speak. His eyes were fixed on Grace, on the tiny rise and fall of her chest, on the fragile life he had somehow become responsible for. Outside, the town whispered, judged, and speculated. But inside this warm room full of firelight and fear, one truth settled firmly into place. He would fight for her, no matter who stood against him. The letter arrived on the coldest morning of the week, delivered by a rider whose horse was still steaming in the chilly air outside Rachel's porch. Cole stood there with Grace in his arms, feeling the warmth of her small body through the blanket. The envelope bore a seal he didn't recognize, but Rachel did. The moment her eyes met the embossed crest, an intricate T carved into a circle, her face went still. Cole, that's the Thatcher family seal. He didn't need to know more. The tightness in Rachel's voice was enough to send a quiet dread crawling into his bones. He shifted Grace in his arms, sat at the table, and studied the letter as though it might bite him if he touched it too quickly. Sheriff Dalton moved closer, watching over his shoulder. Their silence was heavy, the kind that seemed to gather in the corners of the room, waiting to crush whatever hope the morning had left. Cole broke the seal. The words were crisp, formal, and colder than the frost outside. Elias Thatcher requests the immediate return of his granddaughter, Margaret Thatcher's child. Failure to comply will result in legal action. Cole read the lines twice, then a third time. Rachel sat down slowly. Maggie had a baby, and never told anyone. Frank exhaled, rubbing the bridge of his nose. We all knew Maggie Thatcher left town, but no one knew she was pregnant. Cole looked at Grace. Her fingers curled slightly around his shirt. The idea of handing her over, sending her to the grandfather of the woman who had abandoned her in the snow, struck him with such force he had to steady himself. Elias Thatcher, Rachel whispered, isn't just anybody. He owns half the valley, controls the cattle routes, has the judge's ear, and enough money to push a man off the map, Frank added. Cole set the letter down. Money don't make him her father. No, Frank replied. But in the eyes of the law, blood might. Rachel stared at the fire, lips tightening. Maggie must have been desperate to leave her baby with you instead of her own family. Cole's voice was low. Why me? Rachel hesitated. Because she trusted you, even from afar. Maybe she remembered how you helped folks without asking anything back. Maybe she knew you wouldn't turn her child over to someone she was terrified of. Frank shifted, leaning against the wall. There were rumors about Maggie before she left, that she'd been courting one of Thatcher's ranch hands, a boy named Thomas Walker. Quiet, hard-working, loyal as the day is long. Cole nodded. He remembered Thomas, a good kid. Thomas died, Frank continued. Fall from a barn loft. Folks said it was an accident, but others whispered it wasn't. Rachel swallowed. After that, Maggie vanished, didn't say goodbye to a soul. Cole's stomach twisted. So Elias Thatcher drove his own daughter to abandon her baby? Or worse, Frank said. If the story's half true, Maggie didn't just run. She was running from him. Grace stirred in Cole's arms, and he held her closer, as though she could sense the tension coiling through the room. Cole brushed a thumb over her cheek, gentle and slow. She blinked up at him, innocent, trusting. Rachel spoke softly. Cole, this man will demand custody, and with his power, he might win. He won't, Cole said firmly. Rachel's eyes softened. You're brave, but you're one man. One man's enough. Before they could say more, the door swung open. Warren Caldwell stepped inside without bothering to knock. Frank bristled immediately. You don't barge into a woman's home, the sheriff snapped. Warren ignored him. His eyes locked on the letter on the table, and a small, satisfied smile curved his mouth. I heard a Thatcher rider came through. Looks like I was right from the beginning. Cole clenched his jaw. Right about what? That baby doesn't belong with you. Warren picked up the letter, scanning it quickly. Looks like her own family agrees. Rachel stepped forward. Put that down. Warren didn't. Elias Thatcher's reputation speaks for itself. He has blood rights, resources, stability, and enough arrogance to bury a whole town, Frank muttered. Grace stays with me, Cole said, voice steady and flat. Warren raised a brow. For now, perhaps. But Judge Everett honors the law, and the law favors kin. You think he'll side with a widower living miles from civilization? Cole stepped forward, eyes locked on Warren. I found her. I saved her. I've been with her every hour since. And none of that matters, Warren replied with a cold smile. Not against a Thatcher. He placed the letter back on the table with deliberate care, as though it were a card in a game he had already won. You're fighting a losing battle, Harrington. She'll be gone soon, Better prepare yourself." With that, he turned and left, boots crunching against the porch. Silence filled the room. Rachel whispered, "What are you going to do?" Cole looked at Grace, then out the window toward the distant mountains. The place he'd once thought would be his escape from pain. Now they felt like the walls of a cage closing in. "I'm going to fight," he said. "For her, for Maggie, for every wrong that man ever did." Rachel's expression softened into something fierce and loyal. "Then I'm with you." Frank nodded. "So am I." Cole didn't smile. He didn't need to, because the truth hit him with absolute clarity. The battle was no longer about who Grace belonged to. It was about who would protect her, and Cole Harrington had already made his choice. The blizzard rolled in without mercy, a wall of white swallowing the horizon long before Cole Harrington realized just how dangerous the night was about to become. He had spent the afternoon stacking wood outside the cabin, glancing anxiously at the sky every few minutes. Grace had been warm earlier, alert enough to grab his finger with a tiny, determined fist. But by sundown, her forehead burned again, hotter than it had been in days. Rachel had urged him not to travel, not with a baby burning up and the wind rising. But Cole knew what fever could do to an infant. He saddled Ember anyway, intent on riding for the apothecary in town. But fate had a twisted sense of timing. He barely made it a half-mile before the storm hit like a hammer. Snow whipped across the open fields in blinding waves, stinging his face, freezing the tears forming in the corners of his eyes. Ember fought the wind, hooves slipping, breath steaming violently as Cole clutched Grace beneath his coat. He should turn back. He knew it. But Grace's breaths were shallow, small gasps that rattled against his chest. If the medicine didn't come soon, a sudden shout cut through the storm. Cole jerked his head up to see a rider approaching, slow, unsteady, pushing against the wind with stubborn will. When the figure drew closer, Cole recognized the heavy, fur-lined coat, the rigid posture, the unmistakable presence. Elias Thatcher, the last man Cole wanted to see in this storm. The older man's horse slipped, and Elias swore under his breath as he reined the animal to a halt. Snow caked his beard, and his eyes were sharp despite the cold. "Harrington, what in God's name are you doing out here?" "Getting medicine." Cole snapped over the wind. "Grace's fever's back." Elias's gaze dropped to the small bundle in Cole's coat. For a brief moment, something raw flickered in his eyes. Fear, grief, guilt. Then he straightened. "You'll never make it to town. Not in this. I have to try." "No," Elias said firmly. "You'll kill the child, and yourself." Cole bristled. "You don't get to pretend you care now." A gust nearly knocked both riders sideways. Elias cursed raggedly. "Argue later. My ranch is closer than town. We can take shelter there. I'm not stepping foot in your home." "Then we head to yours," Elias said. "Either way, we need walls around us now." Cole hesitated. Grace whimpered, a sound so faint it stabbed straight into his heart. He turned Ember around without another word. Elias followed, and the two men fought the storm together, pushing through freezing wind until the warm glow of the cabin's lantern finally cut through the snow. They stumbled inside, shaking off cold, snow, and pride. Cole rushed Grace to the fire, laying her against warm blankets. Her breathing was fast, uneven. Elias knelt beside them, staring at the tiny girl as though she were a ghost of everything he had lost. "She looks like Maggie," Elias whispered, voice cracking. "Around the eyes." Cole didn't respond. He dipped a cloth into warm water and pressed it gently to Grace's forehead. Elias watched, jaw tight. "Let me help." "She's not yours to help," Cole said sharply. Silence. Only the storm howling outside. Elias finally spoke, the words heavy. "You think I don't know what I've done?" Cole didn't look at him. "You drove Maggie out, drove her past breaking, and now she's gone." Elias's face twisted. The old man looked like a giant collapsing under his own weight. I know. God help me, I know. He pushed himself onto a chair beside the fire, staring at the flames as though they held every answer he had spent his life avoiding. I didn't mean to lose her. His voice was low, almost a whisper. But I was hard. Too hard. On her, on Thomas, on everything. Cole's hand stilled. Elias continued, words spilling like truth dragged from a man who had run out of places to hide. Thomas came to me, asked for my blessing, wanted to marry Maggie proper. I told him no. Told him he was unfit. Not enough money, not enough future. Elias swallowed. I didn't push him, didn't threaten him. But I shamed him. And shame is a crueler weapon than a fist. The fire popped. The wind howled. Grace whimpered again. Cole finally met the older man's eyes. You think your words killed him? I know they did, Elias said. Thomas went back to the barn that night. He was alone, distracted, slipped off the loft. His voice cracked. If I hadn't broken that boy's heart, he'd still be alive. Cole slowly exhaled. He had hated Elias for weeks. For his arrogance, for his entitlement, for daring to demand Grace like she was property. But the man sitting before him now was not the villain he had pictured. He was something worse. A man drowning in regret. What about Maggie? Cole asked quietly. Elias looked toward Grace again, eyes burning with grief. She stopped speaking to me. At first I thought it was just mourning. But one morning she packed her bags, climbed out the window, and rode off. He paused. I never saw her again. Cole studied him carefully. She didn't tell you she was pregnant. No, and now I'll never know why. Elias's voice thinned, but I can imagine. Grace's fever spiked again. Her cry was weak, desperate. Cole immediately picked her up, rocking her gently. Elias leaned forward, panic in his eyes. What do we do? Elias asked. Tell me what to do. Cole's guard softened, not much, but enough for one fragile moment. Hold the lamp steady. I need more light. Elias obeyed instantly. Together they worked, cooling Grace, feeding her drops of milk, whispering to her through the storm's roar. Hours passed. The night felt endless. But slowly, steadily, her breathing evened. Her temperature dropped. Her fists unclenched. When she finally slept, peaceful for the first time in days, both men sagged with relief. Cole whispered, She's strong. Elias nodded. Stronger than any Thatcher I've ever known. A faint smile tugged at Cole's mouth. She ain't a Thatcher. Elias looked at him, really looked at him. And something in the old man's eyes shifted. No, Elias said softly. She's a Harrington. The storm outside continued to rage. But inside the cabin, something thawed. Something overdue, something necessary. Two men, bound by grief, divided by pride, united by a child who had forced them both to face the worst parts of themselves. Redemption didn't come gently. It came through the cold, and for the first time, Elias Thatcher didn't feel like Grace's rival. He felt like her grandfather. The week before, the final custody hearing hung over Willow Creek like a taut wire, humming with tension, fear, and the quiet shifting of loyalties. The storm that had trapped Cole and Elias together had changed more than the temperature of the night. It had altered the course of lives. Word traveled fast in a small western town. People whispered that Elias Thatcher had stayed at Cole Harrington's cabin for 3 days, that he had left not in anger, but with something shaken loose, something softer in his eyes, and more shocking than that. Elias had not demanded Grace back immediately. He had ridden home in silence, his face carrying the look of a man who had walked into a blizzard fueled by pride and walked out humbled. But one man wasn't ready to let go of his crusade. Warren Caldwell. He had doubled down the moment he learned about the blizzard incident, convinced that the town was being manipulated by theatrics and sentimentality. In his mind, the custody hearing was his moment to re-establish order, to prove he had been right all along, that Cole Harrington was unfit, unstable, broken. So Warren knocked on doors, whispered poison in hallways, hinted at impropriety between Cole and Rachel, and warned anyone who would listen that a judge's sympathy was dangerous when the law required logic. And with Elias Thatcher's wealth and influence behind him, at least on paper, Warren believed he still had enough leverage to win, but he didn't know the truth. Elias Thatcher had not signed a single new petition. He had not filed new demands. He had not written or spoken a single word asserting blood rights. He was wrestling with something bigger than pride, guilt, love, and the cold realization that Maggie had chosen Cole in her final moments. Cole sensed the shift, but didn't trust it. He spent the nights walking the cabin floor with Grace sleeping against his shoulder, as though he could protect her from the world simply by holding her tightly enough. Rachel stayed with him more frequently now, helping prepare meals, tending to Grace, making sure Cole didn't work himself into exhaustion. The two of them moved with instinctive closeness. Quiet, steady, unspoken, but deeply felt. And as the hearing approached, that closeness took on new weight. One evening, as snow fell softly outside, Grace slept between them on a warm blanket. Rachel looked at Cole across the lamplight, her expression gentle but firm. "They're going to ask about your home life," she said. "About who's here helping you, about stability." Cole nodded. "I know. You're doing everything you can," Rachel continued. "But they'll look at us and see two unmarried people sharing responsibilities. They'll twist it into something improper." Cole's jaw tightened. "I don't care what they say." "I do," Rachel whispered, "because their words have power." Cole stepped closer, almost without realizing it. "What are you saying?" Rachel took a breath, steadying herself. "We both want Grace safe. We both know she belongs with you. But the law doesn't see intention. It sees structure. They want to know a child has a mother and father under one roof." Cole stared at her, realization dawning slowly. "Rachel, are you suggesting—" She nodded once, eyes unwavering. "Yes. If we marry, they can't question the stability of this home." Silence fell between them. Not awkward, not uncertain, just full of all the meaning neither had spoken aloud before. Cole stepped closer, heart beating hard beneath the weight of the decision. "I won't let you marry me just for Grace," he said softly. Rachel gave him a small, sad smile. "Then you really haven't been paying attention." He felt something tighten in his chest. Hope, fear, everything tangled together. "You mean it?" "I do." Her voice was steady. "I've watched the way you fight for her. I've watched the way you hold her like she's the last good thing in this world. I trust you. I love her. And—" She hesitated, breath catching. "And I've grown to love you." Cole's breath left him. Words didn't come easily. Not for him, not after everything he'd lost. But something inside him finally broke free. He reached for her hand, his voice low. "I love you too." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't poetic. It was honest, simple, raw, and true. The next morning, under a gray sky and the faint scent of winter pine, Cole and Rachel stood before Sheriff Dalton, who officiated their quiet, unadorned ceremony. Grace slept in Rachel's arms as they exchanged vows. Not for show, not for law, but because the moment felt inevitable, woven into the fabric of everything they had endured. "By the authority invested in me," Frank said, smiling faintly, "I pronounce you husband and wife." Cole kissed Rachel softly, with the gentleness of a man learning how to hope again. But hope didn't silence the opposition. 3 days before the hearing, Warren Caldwell stormed into the saloon, waving a signed statement he planned to present to Judge Everett, alleging that Cole and Rachel had married solely for legal manipulation, that Cole was emotionally unstable, that Grace belonged with her proper bloodline. He rallied what support he could. But something had shifted in Willow Creek. People remembered the storm. They remembered Elias Thatcher's sudden silence. They remembered how Cole had ridden through deadly weather, holding Grace inside his coat. And more importantly, they remembered the look in his eyes. The look of a man who would die for that baby, if necessary. When the hearing day finally arrived, the courthouse filled with townsfolk. Rachel held Grace. Cole stood beside her, shoulders squared. Frank took a seat behind them. Warren sat to the side, smirking with grim satisfaction. But Elias Thatcher rose from the front row. He cleared his throat, cane tapping softly on the wooden floor. "Your Honor," Elias said, voice steady but thick, "I withdraw my custody claim." Gasps echoed through the room. Warren shot to his feet. "Mr. Thatcher, you can't—" "I can," Elias thundered, "and I will." Judge Everett held up a hand. "On what grounds?" Elias looked back at Cole and Rachel. His voice softened. "Because my daughter made her choice. She left her child with a man she trusted, and I failed her long enough in life. I will not fail her in death." The judge nodded slowly. Then Warren stood, face purple with rage. "This is absurd. He can't—" "Sit down, Caldwell," the judge snapped, "before I remove you." For the first time, Warren obeyed. The judge turned to Cole and Rachel. "The court must consider the best interests of the child above all else. And based on the evidence, I find that Grace Harrington shall remain with the Harrington family." Rachel's breath caught. Cole closed his eyes in relief, but Judge Everett wasn't finished. He lifted his gavel. "This ruling is final and binding." The gavel struck wood, echoing through the room like thunder. Grace was theirs, and the fight was finally over. The weeks that followed the custody ruling felt like the slow thaw after a long, brutal winter. Quiet, cautious, yet warm enough to let something new take root. Snow still covered the Montana plains, blanketing the world in white. But inside the Harrington cabin, a different season was unfolding. Grace laughed more now. Rachel hummed as she worked. Cole, still learning how to let peace back into his bones, found himself listening to the wind not for danger, but simply because it sounded like home. But one final step remained before their new life could truly begin. Agent Samuel Calloway arrived without fanfare, riding into Willow Creek with his coat buttoned high and his expression carved from neutrality. Government investigators rarely smiled. They rarely frowned either. Their job was simply to judge. And this man judged everything with the calm precision of someone who had seen families built and broken 100 times. He spent the first day speaking with townsfolk. Some he questioned closely. Rachel, Sheriff Dalton, even Mrs. Cartwright from the bakery who claimed to know everyone's business long before they knew it themselves. Others he observed quietly, noting how the community had shifted, softened, or hardened through the months of conflict. People said the same thing again and again. Grace was safe. Grace was loved. Grace belonged with Cole and Rachel Harrington. Still, Calloway's face gave nothing away. On the morning of the final inspection, he rode out to the Harrington property alone. The snow had begun to melt, leaving glistening patches of earth and the faint scent of pine in the air. Cole met him at the gate, shoulders squared, jaw set. Not out of hostility, but because this man's judgment could still change everything. "Mr. Harrington," Calloway said curtly. "Agent," Cole replied. "Rachel's inside with Grace." Calloway dismounted and followed Cole into the cabin. The fire burned warmly, and Rachel looked up from the rocking chair where Grace lay bundled against her chest. The baby squealed happily at the sight of Cole, reaching out with tiny hands that always seemed to know exactly who he was. Calloway watched silently. He took note of the neatly stacked wood near the hearth, the tidy kitchen, the toys carved from wood scattered across the table. He asked Rachel questions. How Grace slept, how she ate, whether she had been sick recently. He asked Cole about income, neighbors, plans for the future. Every answer was measured, honest, steady. When Calloway requested a moment alone with Cole, Rachel stepped outside with Grace, humming softly as she wrapped the baby in another quilt. Calloway studied Cole with an expression that revealed nothing. You weren't obligated to take her in, he said after a long pause. No, Cole replied quietly. I wasn't. Most men would have walked away, left her to fate. I know. Calloway tilted his head slightly. Why didn't you? Cole hesitated, searching for the truth behind the simple instinct that had driven him since that night by the creek. Because she needed someone, he said finally. Because I'd already lost a child, and I couldn't let another die. Because she was alone. And because... He swallowed. Because she felt like mine the moment I picked her up. Calloway nodded once. And your wife? She seems attached. Cole almost smiled. Rachel loved her before she loved me. Another pause. Then Calloway stepped to the window, watching Rachel outside with Grace. The woman's laughter floated through the glass, soft and warm. Mr. Harrington, Calloway said, still looking out. I've investigated dozens of cases. Some families fight for custody because they want ownership. Others want reputation, money, control. He turned back to Cole. Yours is the first case I've seen in a long time where everyone involved, including the grandfather, wants what is best for the child. Cole exhaled, tension loosening in his shoulders. Calloway continued. This town respects you. Your wife is competent, nurturing, and stable. You have land, shelter, means of income, and support from key members of the community. His voice softened a fraction. More importantly, that child is safe here, loved here, and that is something no amount of blood or money can replace. He reached into his coat and pulled out a signed document. I am recommending permanent custody to the Harrington family. For a moment, Cole didn't move, couldn't speak. The weight of months, the fear, the battles, the sleepless nights, settled and evaporated all at once. Thank you, he said finally, the words rough with emotion he didn't try to hide. Calloway nodded. She's a lucky girl, Harrington. Then he corrected himself. No, she's a blessed girl. The agent left soon after, riding back toward town under a sky beginning to brighten with hints of spring. Cole stepped outside, where Rachel stood holding Grace against her shoulder. She looked at him with a question in her eyes. Even before he said a word, she sensed the answer. It's done, Cole whispered. Rachel pressed a hand to her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes, silent, grateful tears that shimmered like glass in the cold air. Grace babbled happily, pulling at Rachel's hair, unaware that she had just gained a forever she almost never had. Cole wrapped his arms around them both. For the first time in years, the future didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a gift. Spring arrived slowly, but it arrived all the same. Elias Thatcher visited often, never imposing, always humbled, trying in small ways to repair the pieces of a past he couldn't undo. He brought blankets, toys, even a deed to a piece of land adjacent to Cole's. Not as payment, not as guilt, as family. Grace grew stronger, crawling across the cabin floor, laughing at her parents, reaching for her grandfather with tiny, trusting hands he once believed he didn't deserve to hold. Rachel's belly rounded with new life. Another child, another chance, another chapter. One afternoon, the family visited Maggie Thatcher's grave. Cole stood beside Rachel as Elias placed a small carved flower at the headstone. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying both sorrow and peace. Elias knelt, touching the cold stone gently. "I'm doing my best, Maggie," he murmured. "We all are." Cole looked at Grace, then at Rachel, then at the horizon. The past had shaped them. The pain had carved them. But the future, bright, uncertain, beautiful, now belonged to them. Forged in loss, strengthened by love, held together by hope. The Harrington family's journey began in a storm of fear and ended in a quiet dawn, where love proved stronger than blood and hope rose from the harshest winter. Cole, once defined by grief, found purpose again in the fragile heartbeat of a child left to die. Rachel discovered a love built not on perfection, but on courage and devotion. Elias Thatcher, hardened by pride and regret, found redemption in the soft hands of the granddaughter he nearly lost twice. And little Grace, once abandoned on a frozen creek, became the thread stitching together broken hearts, fractured families, and long-buried wounds. Their story is not one of sudden miracles, but of quiet bravery. The courage to forgive, the strength to hold on, and the faith to begin again. As seasons shifted over Montana's untamed frontier, the Harringtons built a home from everything life had taken from them and everything it had unexpectedly given back. A home where love is chosen, where second chances are honored, and where hope, gentle, unyielding, alive, grows stronger than any winter storm. End of article. Good night.